name is Onome Ekeh. I'm here in Buenos Aires at the Museo Moderno to open my show Especulaciones. I'm bringing in these forces, speculating them into being, basically. I'm reimagining the past, and this reimagined past is, it projects into the future, and that changes our present, I like to think. I think I have an anarchist impulse, and I want to change things, but I'm not so interested in protests because maybe that's a bit too much like asking permission from the powers that be. I'd rather reimagine things and create these corrective timelines. You know, in science fiction, you have this thing where people travel back into the past because they want to change things. And then when they do that, they inordinately create this alternate timeline. So you have timeline B and timeline C, and they're running in parallel. But my idea is that all these parallel tracks come together because they're an antidote to timeline A. And my idea is that they come together at some point and merge, and then we get, for a shining moment, the sort of utopia that we were looking for, but just for a moment, because, you know, these things have to dissolve and then we start again. I need freedom for myself, so it means that other people need to be free. It's very simple. I'm not even going to go into gender politics, equality, just freedom to express yourself. So in my work, you know, I'm actually going back to the repressions of my past, you know, or like things that irked me as a child, growing up in Nigeria as a teenager. I grew up under a military regime, and yeah, there were ridiculous laws. Like at some point, you know, it was illegal for women to wear trousers. Now, if you're a tomboy at 13 and you're sort of pseudo-punk or proto-goth, this is terrible news. And I got picked on a lot. I got picked on by family, friends, by society in general, because it's not so much that the military enforced it, society enforced it. It was extremely bourgeois. So that was what I was fighting against with this series here that you see, Afropunk, Lagos Afropunk 1982. It's a reimagined past where, you know, Nigerian kids could just let their freak flag fly in this way. Yeah, so it's this kind of thing that I'm bucking up against, you know, the freedom to express oneself, to actually be yourself. Afropunk 1982 actually comes out of my conversation or my dialogue with AI, specifically Midjourney. I discovered it maybe 2 years ago, and, you know, there was a lot of hoo-ha about how it was destroying artistry and whatnot. But, you know, I think I've been waiting for this. I've been working digitally for almost 20 years now. So I've coded, I'm adept at Photoshop and After Effects. I spend a lot of time, you know, in digital design. So when I saw this, I was super curious. What happened this was made with earlier versions of Midjourney. And then at that time, how should I put it? It was kind of primitive. Like, you'd prompt and you'd get these sort of almost grotesque, grotesque feedback from the program. And the reason why was because I kept on saying Nigerian punks in Lagos, and it didn't have any data in its, what do you call it? It's a data set. Whatever it was trained on, it didn't have Africa in it. So I kept on getting these very strange images, but I liked them because they reminded me of these fairy tales I'd grown up with about spirit children. So I started working with that, and because it didn't have us Africans in the database, I started providing my own teenage photos and images, you know, African artifacts and cities, and creating, sort of building up. So basically, it was a dialogue. It would give me back some images, and I was like, nope, here, try this. And that's how this sort of developed. And then with Photoshop, I was able to sort of finesse things. If you look at these carefully, you'll see that some of these kids, even though they're just meant to be punks enjoying themselves, they're not quite human. Some of them have actual cat ears and, extra rows of teeth, this kind of thing. So yeah, that was kind of, that's how that developed. So Glittering Witness actually went through the same program. So this was a more recent work. And what's happened so far is that Midjourney and all these other generative AIs have become incredibly stable. And so when you prompt something, you actually get what you asked for, which is incredibly boring and stultifying and horrific for someone like me. So that's one part of it. But what happened was maybe 3 years ago, my father passed away. And when he did, there were all these stories about my great-grandfather and, all this information uncovered about him. And I realized that, I don't really have so much information about the family line because we, in West Africa, we're so reliant on oral tradition, and which is great, but it's not so great if the British come and wipe that out. So there's no record. So I have these stories about my great-grandfather who considered himself a great magician and had traveled from one part of the country to another to start up this Society of the Birds. And nobody, you can't get a lot of information about this from family members because, they view, it's superstitious, there's it's too much juju, it's too much black magic, and everyone's good Christians now. So I decided I'm going to take what old family photos I have, what artifacts from the region I can put them all in my AI generator and come up with this speculative genealogy, like not just ancestors, but also family talismans, family guardians, this kind of new mythology of the family. So I did that, and I got these very striking images. And actually, African Jetset was, like maybe the first generation of that. But I was really looking for something that felt a bit more numinous, or I'm not sure how to put it. I needed a more ethereal feel to it. This kind of thing was too solid. And one of the things that I found very striking about working with Midjourney and the other generative AIs is this, when you prompt, you put in your words, and then there's like a few seconds. It used to be a whole minute, but now it's just a few seconds of this sort of latent space that you don't know what's going on. It's very blurry. It's not quite a negative space. It's burgeoning, and always reminded me of the first chapter of Genesis, where it says, in the beginning, God created the world, the heavens and the earth became without form and void. It became like this latent space. And then the Spirit of God hovers over the water. And then all of a sudden, he issues the first prompt, let there be light. And after that, he went into a prompting frenzy, created the whole world in 7 days, and all of that. So I was interested in that kind of the formlessness and everything. I wanted to capture that energy. So what I did was I took these sort of very more solid images and turned them into black and white. And the word I was looking for before was spectral. I wanted the spectral energy. And then I thought, maybe if I'm thinking of ancestry, maybe if I go into the ancestry of this code, like ASCII, for example, ASCII code, like this is earlier tech that, prefigures Midjourney or generative AI. Let's pass it through an ASCII encoder. So I started experimenting with that, and that's how these images came about. But I really like them because they feel like old photography, in the sense that like the negatives needed to be developed, you have to put them under this light through this this whole process. So there's that. And also I'm very interested in the relationship between text and tech and textiles, And these feel very woven to me, like it has that energy of, fabric, which to me is also genealogy because its chromosomes are woven. So yeah, there you have it. That's where that came from. African Jetset came out of a need. It came out of like thinking about, sort of just contemplating about the history of Black migration from the transatlantic slave trade, from war, famine, like all these displacements. Like you have people on the Mediterranean, or leaving Cuba to Florida. Like it's tragic. There's a lot of tragedy involved, and the migration always seems like we're being displaced. Even in my parents' generation, I remember at some point there were no more doctors left in Nigeria because we had excellent doctors, but they all went to Dubai or Kuwait. There was a brain drain. So there's this whole displacement scenario. Travel is great. It's a way of getting better opportunity, but it's driven by this, heartbreak for me. And I thought, what if we dialed back and just thought of reimagine this whole scenario? Supposing there was no slave trade, supposing you just had the Portuguese coming in and trading, and then like Africans went to Japan, whatever. Like, what if all these these trade routes were just really mutually beneficial, and we developed along the lines of like our material resources that which we have so much. Maybe we could even luxuriate in this. And I kept thinking about that, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to create an African jet set. This is people. And one of the things that influenced me, there's this book by a Japanese author, Junichiro Tazaki. It's called In Praise of Shadows, and he contemplates darkness. But one of the things he speculates, which I really love, is how paper would have developed if the Japanese had been allowed, if they weren't interrupted by the West, if they had been allowed to develop the printing press in their own way, in their own idiom, in their own, and he would talk about the thickness and translucency of paper and the things that they valued. So in the beginning, I started out, as you will see, with these, with very elegantly dressed people in front of airplanes. And it was sort of a pie-in to my parents' generation, because it was back then, everyone dressed up to travel and you had to look elegant. I mean, up until when I was growing up, we were dressed up to get on the plane too. It was horrible. It was like we were going to church or something. My brothers had to wear suits and I had to wear a dress. And in fact, I think there was a scandal once. We went to the airport and some family friend allowed their daughters to dress up in jeans to get on the plane. It was such a scandal. But yeah, it was a callback to that. And but at first there were planes, and then I thought, no, I want to develop this in this African way, because we tend to go inward and more mystical. Supposing the idea of travel is that you show up dressed up and you use your bird as a soul, and you don't know where you're going, but you're entering the cosmos, but you have to dress up and show up, and you enter this dream space, sort of like Aboriginal dream time. So that's where it became a bit of a more mystical jet set, dream edition. Curiously dressed gentleman comes out of my two obsessions. There's a Nigerian writer, Amos Tutuola, who was he was a man of letters, as in he didn't have an education. He stopped in elementary school. So his English was maybe questionable, but that didn't stop him. He wrote these incredible novels. The most famous ones are My Life in the Bush of Ghosts, which David Byrne and Brian Eno made a concept album out of. And the second one is called The Palm Wine Drinkard. And The Palm Wine Drinkard was something that featured in my youth very heavily, because I was so fascinated by these stories. They're sort of Yoruba folklore, but retold in this very dizzying English. And I guess what delighted me was that, it wasn't quite broken English or pidgin English, which we have in Nigeria, but broken and pidgin English are delightful because they're tools of revolt against the British Empire. They take the Queen's English and just turn it on its head and really create this other, overwhelm it with the rhythms and the, chaos patterns of whatever language, like the ground, like it's a really beautiful thing. And this book is completely like this. So it was something that I always, I think I've always been trying to make this story of the beautifully dressed gentleman, as it's called in the book. I've been writing about this for years. I don't know how long, but it's an obsession. So that's one armature of it. Second is that there's this film from the 70s called The Day of the Jackal, which they just remade for Netflix. It's a really enigmatic film. Actually, it was one of the first pieces of cinema that I saw as a child that didn't have any kind of soundtrack. It's just really clean. It's just diegetic sounds, like whatever is on camera, but no theme song. It's not James Bond, but it's a very Bond-like theme. This anonymous British assassin is hired to kill Charles de Gaulle in France, and everyone's after him, but it's very clean and dry. And it was one of those first international espionage films that I fell in love with. But I think it was also because of that era, like the late 70s, early 80s was in Europe and around the world, you had these sort of liberation fighters, like you had anarchists, this was before 9/11, so a hijack of an airplane was a real hijack. They would just take it to the tarmac and give terms, release our prisoners. It was PLO, it was Rotafaktor in Germany, the Red Brigade in Italy, you had the IRA, there were all these anarchist groups. And when I was a kid, it was very exciting that you go to London and then all of a sudden there would be a bomb threat called in and everyone had to clear the area. It's not really about revolting against the West in the way it is. It's a way of, destroying or messing with the Western imaginary. And only because it represents a kind of homogeneity, imperialist mindset, this imperialist time. So it's a disruption of that. And that's what all it's doing. It's not trying to get back funds to the so-called third world or make things right. I think we've passed that point of trying to do restitutions. I think we have to actually disrupt what's here and all go into the future together. There's no turning back at this point. Society of the Birds. So as I mentioned before, when my father died, we found out about my great-grandfather, and there wasn't so much to go on. I would ask questions and people were like, we don't want to talk about that. It's doing some magic stuff, whatever, There was a thing when I was growing up, my ethnic group is Urobo, but my name, Ekeh, is Igbo. And every time I went out, or everywhere we went, people assumed we were Igbo because of an Igbo name, but we had an H at the end. And people were like, why do you have this H at the end? I was like, because we're not Igbo. And then we find out afterwards that we are when my father dies. But the reason why that's important to me was because every time I would ask, what does his name mean, Ekeh? And my dad would say it's a kind of tree. But Ekeh in Igbo actually means python, or creator. Anyway, Society of the Birds is a speculative genealogy about my great-grandfather. And I was interested in this idea of, this gathering of the birds because it's in every culture. In antiquity, keeps on coming up. So I kind of merged those mythologies with the idea of my grandfather and the name, everything, put it all together. That's the film. I was always a writer, but I was like, since I'm a writer, why do I have to go to school for that? I don't need to go to school for that. And I wanted to paint, and actually, one of the things When I was a kid, we had these encyclopedias, Encyclopedia Britannica at home, and there were these fantastic prints of Monet, Manet, like Andy Warhol, everybody, like all the modern art. And I wanted to be an impressionist, you know. I loved the Fauvists, I loved, you know, Van Gogh, like all these. This was my passion, and I would, you know, paint and repaint the sunflowers over and over again. I was actually training, yeah, it was like data training for me. But there was kind of that. But you know, one of the things about the painting thing was I realized the very first time that I was in New York and actually got to see the water lilies at the MoMA right there. It was like really huge and magnificent. I was really underwhelmed, and I was really sad about that. Like, why am I not ecstatic to be in front of this painting that I love so much? But the answer was that I already got the information I needed from it a long time ago, from this little print, like not so little, but yeah, from Encyclopedia Britannica. And I think that was my first foray into the digital world, because I was only interested after that in what you could carry with you, the information that could be carried. Real reason I stopped writing was because I had written these collections of short fiction and a short novel, and I had a literary agent. And long story short, she made me sign a 5-year contract, but nothing came of it. And when I asked her, because she was super enthusiastic, she was like, yes, African writers are the future. I was like, okay, whatever, you know, like, should I sell this book or these collections? And, you know, when I confronted her, she was like, well, you know, it's really hard between, you know, for a Black girl like you. It was the first time I realized that I was being considered as a quote unquote Black girl. But it had always been my problem in New York, especially, that my work wasn't doing what Black girls were supposed to be doing. So I didn't realize it at the time, but it stopped me from writing. I got tired of this nonsense, and I was like, I'm going to go into design. Like, no one cares that I'm Black or white or whatever. It's digits, you know, like it's numbers, it's coding. I'll be behind a wall of code. Nobody will ever know it's me. So I did that for a while, and that was a break. It was like 12, 13 years of not writing. And in the meantime, well, I wasn't writing my own stuff, but I was actually supporting a lot of other people. I did a lot of dramaturgy for like friends, like different people in theater, and worked on a lot of art projects. But it wasn't, and in a way it was a lifeline, because it kept me in touch. It kept me sort of going. Can art transform society, or like, you know, alleviate the burden of colonialism, like heal this, like sort of this gashing wound? Yes, absolutely. And I think, you know, for me, just seeing Afrobeats is sort of the antidote to, like, it's just a music scene for now, but imagine if that spreads across, like within architecture, medicine. Like, what if we start talking to ourselves? What if and this is the, you know, turning the gaze away from like the Western hierarchies and like looking inwards. So yeah, I do think that we are kind of, artists are the antidote that we're looking for. What I would love for people to get out of this, these series, this exhibition as a whole, is the power of imagining your own future, the possibilities of having this conversation with the past to project a new future, or vice versa. You know, you can actually reimagine things at your own scale. And I think that's what I would really like to impress upon people. The other thing I want is like, the fact that you can change things should give you a sense of optimism. I'd like to invite people to come see this show, just to enter the conversation, to sort of experience what that get a mouth feel for it, you know, like what does that mean to talk to the past and project into the future, or vice versa. So I really want people to come in here and experience it. And I think it's a strong, very strong curation by Victoria Northern. I'm really delighted with there's fantastic cinema here that's been built for the show, but I think they're going to keep it on. So yeah, like come through.